Chief Petty Officer Derek Keller pressed the radio to his blood-soaked vest. "We are overrun. I repeat, overrun." The mountain was swallowing his SEAL team alive. Then, slicing through the static and the screams, came a calm, female voice. Bore 1-1, rolling in. The sky was about to tear open. The Spingar mountain range does not forgive mistakes. It is a jagged, brutal stretch of rock and ice that has swallowed armies whole for centuries. For Chief Petty Officer Derek Keller and his 6-man Navy SEAL reconnaissance element, it was supposed to be a standard Overwatch mission. High altitude, low visibility, eyes on a high-value target transit route. But war rarely cares about the plan. It started with a single, sharp crack that echoed off the granite walls of the ravine. Before the sound could fully register, the air was ripped apart by the deafening roar of DSK heavy machine guns and a barrage of rocket-propelled grenades. They hadn't just stumbled into a patrol, they had walked directly into a coordinated, heavily fortified ambush. "Contact right, ridge line, 300 meters, shouted Jackson Hayes, his MK-48 machine gun already roaring to life, spitting brass into the snow. Keller dove behind a jagged outcropping of shale, the rock instantly exploding into razor-sharp shrapnel as heavy-caliber rounds chewed into it. "Doc, get on the horn. We need air, right now." Ryan Doc Miller was huddled behind a fallen boulder, desperately trying to shield their long-range radio from the hailstorm of lead. "Comms are jammed, Chief. I'm getting nothing but static and ghost echoes off the canyon walls. SATCOM is totally blind." The situation deteriorated with terrifying speed. They were pinned in a V-shaped depression, completely exposed to the high ground on 3 sides. It was a textbook kill zone. The enemy fighters, numbering at least 60 to 80, were systematically closing the net. They weren't rushing. They were bleeding the SEALs out, using plunging fire to eliminate their cover inch by inch. 50 yards to Keller's left, Connor O'Brien took a round to the shoulder, the impact spinning him hard into the dirt. "Man down!" Hayes bellowed, laying down a desperate suppressive burst while Doc Miller broke cover, sprinting through a blizzard of incoming fire to reach O'Brien. Dust and snow erupted around Miller's boots as he slid into the shallow depression beside the wounded operator, immediately applying pressure to the arterial bleed. "We can't hold this," Miller screamed over the din of explosions. "They're flanking us on the east ridge." Keller gritted his teeth, slamming a fresh magazine into his rifle. He was a veteran of 2 decades of warfare. He had survived Fallujah, the Korengal, and Helmand. But as he looked up at the muzzle flashes blinking like deadly fireflies across the ridgeline, a cold, heavy realization settled into his gut. They were not going to walk out of this valley. The enemy had positioned anti-aircraft artillery, AAA, on the highest peaks, creating an umbrella of death that had already forced a flight of Apache helicopters to turn back 20 minutes earlier. Without air support, the SEALs were just 6 men against an army, trapped in a stone coffin. Keller pulled a smoke grenade from his webbing, his hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding his veins. He looked at Hayes, whose barrel was literally glowing red from sustained fire. He looked at Miller, hands slick with O'Brien's blood. These were his brothers. He was the one who had brought them to this mountain, and he was going to be the one to stay behind so the rest could try to break the encirclement. "Doc," Keller keyed his localized headset. "Once I pop this smoke, you grab O'Brien and move down the wash. Hayes, you lay down everything you have left. I'm going to draw their fire." "Chief, no!" Hayes yelled back. "That's suicide. You'll never make it 10 feet. "That's an order, Hayes," Keller barked, his voice leaving no room for argument. He gripped the pin of the smoke grenade, mentally preparing himself for the final sprint into the open. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, making peace with the mountain. But before his finger could pull the ring, a sharp, rhythmic burst of static crackled through Doc Miller's jammed radio, cutting through the interference like a scalpel. "Any station this net. This is Bore 1-1, blind broadcast. Over." It was weak, it was fragmented, but it was American. Miller scrambled for the handset, his bloody fingers slipping on the plastic. "Bore 1-1, this is Outlaw 2. We are entirely pinned down, taking heavy casualties. Danger, close. I repeat, danger close." There was a agonizing pause, filled only by the terrifying scream of an RPG impacting 20 yards away, showering the SEALs in dirt and deafening them. Then, the voice returned. It was female. It was stripped of all panic, carrying the icy, calculated calm of a professional executioner. Outlaw 2. Bore 1-1 copies. Hold your ground. I am inbound. Captain Sarah Jenkins was supposed to be drinking terrible coffee in the debriefing room at Bagram Airfield. Her A-10C Warthog, a heavily armored twin-engine beast of an aircraft, was battered, bruised, and nearly empty. She had just spent the last 3 hours providing overwatch for an armored convoy, expending the majority of her flares, missiles, and fuel. Her fuel gauge was resting uncomfortably close to the red line bingo fuel. She had just enough to make it over the peaks and back to the runway. On top of that, her left wing was sporting a jagged, 2-foot hole from a lucky burst of ground fire earlier in the day, causing a slight but persistent drag that fought her control stick. Her wingman, Lieutenant Bradley Cole, was flying just off her right side. Bore 1-1, Bore 1-2. We are tracking a massive front moving in over the Spingar. Visibility is dropping to 0. Command is screaming for us to RTB immediately. Sarah checked her instruments. Cole was right. A dense, freezing mountain fog was rolling over the jagged peaks like a grey tsunami, dropping visibility to less than half a mile. Flying an A-10 through the Hindu Kush in clear weather was dangerous. Doing it blind was a death sentence. The Warthog flew low and slow, designed to hunt in the mud, which meant terrain avoidance was entirely reliant on the pilot's eyes. Copy that, 1-2, Sarah replied, banking her jet slightly to align with the return vector. That was when she heard the transmission. It was a weak, panicked voice, bleeding through the guard frequency, entirely pinned down, taking heavy casualties. Danger, close. Sarah's hand froze on the throttle. She checked her tactical map. The coordinates from the faint signal plotted to a deep, jagged ravine miles off her current path. It was designated a red zone heavy enemy anti-air presence. Command, this is Bore 1-1, Sarah transmitted, her voice steady. I am intercepting a distress call from a friendly unit in Sector Echo Juliet, diverting to assist. Major Thomas Reed, the air operations controller back at base, came on the line instantly, his voice thick with tension. Negative, Bore 1-1. I repeat, negative. You are bingo fuel. Your airframe is damaged, and that sector is flooded with ZSU, 2-3 anti-air batteries. An Apache flight just got chased out of there. The weather is 0 to 0. You are ordered to return to base immediately. Sarah looked at her fuel gauge. She looked out the canopy at the impenetrable wall of grey clouds, swallowing the mountains ahead of her. She knew the regulations. She knew the math. If she diverted, she might not have enough fuel to make it back. If she went into that ravine, the AAA would likely tear her damaged jet out of the sky. But she also knew the sound of a man who was watching his brothers die. Sarah reached forward and flicked off her radio transponder, severing the tracking link with command. Bore 1-2, Sarah said to her wingman. Command is right. You don't have the fuel for a combat run, and it's too thick in there for 2 birds. RTB, Cole. That's an order. Sarah, what the hell are you doing? Cole's voice cracked over the radio. You go down there. You aren't coming out. Just have a cold beer waiting for me, Brad, Sarah replied, cutting the channel. She banked the massive armored A-10 violently to the left, diving the aircraft directly into the blinding soup of the storm front. The cockpit rattled violently as the Warthog plunged into the turbulent mountain air. The world outside her canopy turned a uniform, suffocating white. Outlaw 2, Bore 1-1 copies. Sarah spoke into her mask, her eyes scanning her digital terrain system. Hold your ground. I am inbound. Flying completely on instruments, Sarah navigated the deadly labyrinth of the Hindu Kush. The radar altimeter screamed warnings at her as jagged peaks slipped past her wings, hidden by the fog, mere hundreds of feet away. She was descending rapidly, threading the needle through a valley she couldn't even see. Terrain, terrain, pull up. The automated voice of Bitchin' Betty echoed in her helmet. Sarah ignored it, trusting her gut and her digital map. As she broke through the bottom of the cloud ceiling, the world exploded into terrifying clarity. She was flying barely 300 feet above the valley floor. Directly ahead of her was the V-shaped ravine, and it was illuminated by a horrifying amount of tracer fire. From her vantage point, Sarah could see the tactical nightmare unfolding. The SEALs were trapped in the bottom of a stone bowl. Hundreds of enemy fighters were swarming the ridges above them, pouring fire down in a merciless crossfire. Worse, Sarah instantly spotted the heavy AAA emplacements. 3 ZSU, 2-3 anti-aircraft guns were positioned on the high peaks, their barrels already pivoting to track her incoming jet. To make a standard strafing run, Sarah would have to fly in a straight, predictable line above the ravine, making her an unmissable target for the anti-air batteries. The enemy knew this. They were waiting for her to line up. "Bore 1-1, this is Outlaw." Chief Keller's voice roared in her ear, no longer panicked, but brutally absolute. "They are inside the wire. Enemy forces are less than 50 meters from our position. If you shoot, you are going to hit us." Danger close meant dropping munitions within 600 meters of friendly troops. 50 meters was not danger close. It was practically hand-to-hand combat. A single mistake, with the A-10's massive 30mm cannon, would tear the SEALs to shreds alongside the enemy. "Copy. Outlaw. Keep your heads down," Sarah replied, her breathing slowing down, entering the hyper-focused flow state of combat. She didn't line up for a standard run. Instead, Sarah jammed the throttle forward and pulled the stick hard into her lap, sending the A-10 into a dizzying, vertical climb directly toward the anti-air batteries on the peak. The enemy gunners opened fire. Thick ropes of green tracer rounds filled the air, tracking her ascent. Shrapnel pinged against the Warthog's titanium bathtub, the armored shell protecting the cockpit. Warning alarms blared as her damaged left wing shuddered violently under the extreme G-force. Sarah wasn't running. She was baiting them. Reaching the apex of her climb, right as the jet was about to stall in the thin mountain air, Sarah kicked the rudder hard and threw the A-10 into a violent, inverted dive. She was flying upside down, plunging straight down the sheer cliff face of the ravine, using the mountain itself to shield her from the AAA fire. She rolled the jet upright at the very last second, pulling out of the dive less than 200 feet above the rocky floor. She was flying so low that the jet's exhaust kicked up a blinding trail of snow and dust. She was coming in from the side of the ravine, perpendicular to the SEALs' position. To hit the enemy without hitting the Americans, she had to thread a continuous burst of 30mm rounds along a jagged, uneven ridgeline while flying at 350 miles per hour. She squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon did not sound like a gun. It sounded like the sky itself was ripping in half, a terrifying, earth-shaking brrr. 75 depleted uranium rounds per second poured from the nose of the A-10, striking the ridgeline with apocalyptic force. The impact zone erupted in a massive wall of fire, rock, and smoke. The enemy line simply ceased to exist, obliterated by a weapon designed to vaporize tanks. Sarah pulled up violently, her jet screaming in protest as she narrowly cleared the far canyon wall, clipping the top branches of a solitary pine tree. "Outlaw 2, assess damage," Sarah called out, panting heavily as she banked for a second pass, eyeing her critically low fuel gauge. On the ground, Chief Keller slowly lowered his arms, covered in dust and debris from the strafing run. The ridgeline, 50 meters away, previously swarming with enemies, was a smoking crater. "Bore 1-1, Keller breathed into the radio, absolute awe in his voice. "Good hits. You just bought us a life." But the fight wasn't over. As Sarah circled back, a proximity alarm screamed in her cockpit. A shoulder-fired surface-to-air missile had just been launched from the eastern ridge, and it was tracking directly for her damaged left wing. The cockpit of the A-10C Warthog suddenly transformed into a screaming choir of electronic alarms. The piercing, high-pitched weedy-weedy-weedy of the missile launch warning system drilled into Captain Sarah Jenkins' ears. "Missile launch, right, 6 o'clock. The automated voice of the threat warning system droned. Through the scratched acrylic of her canopy, Sarah caught the unmistakable white exhaust trail of a man-portable air defense system, an SA-7 Grail surface-to-air missile. It was tracking straight up the mountain wall, hungrily chasing the massive heat signature of her twin TF-34 turbofan engines. "Braking right, deploying countermeasures," Sarah shouted into the comms, a violent reflex taking over. She slammed the control stick hard to the right, banking the heavy jet into a gut-wrenching turn, while simultaneously smashing the flare release button on her throttle. Thump, 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 thump. A stream of blindingly hot magnesium flares shot out from the A-10's tail, cascading down like a waterfall of white fire into the grey fog of the valley. The missile was fast, but the A-10 was built to survive hell. The SA-7's primitive infrared seeker head got confused by the sudden wall of heat from the flares. It jerked violently in the air, lost its lock on the jet's exhaust, and veered toward the falling magnesium. But it was too close. The missile detonated less than 30 feet from Sarah's left wing. The explosion was a deafening, metallic thunderclap that physically threw the massive aircraft sideways. A shockwave of pure kinetic energy and jagged shrapnel tore through the sky, ripping into the Warthog's already damaged left wing and shredding the outer casing of the left engine. Inside the cockpit, the master caution panel lit up like a Christmas tree. Red and amber warning lights flashed furiously. The control stick in Sarah's hand suddenly went completely limp, dropping forward as if disconnected. The jet immediately pitched violently nose down, rolling toward the jagged granite peaks below. "Mayday, Mayday, Bore 11 is hit. I have lost primary hydraulics," Sarah yelled, her body slamming against her 5-point harness as negative G-forces threatened to black her out. The A-10 was plummeting toward the Earth at over 400 miles per hour. The mountain floor was rushing up to meet her in a terrifying blur of grey stone and white snow. In any other aircraft, an F-16 or an F-35, this would be the moment to pull the ejection handle. Without hydraulic fluid to move the massive control surfaces on the wings and tail, a modern fighter jet is just a multi-million-dollar brick. But the A-10 was a relic of the Cold War, designed with a mechanical backup system meant to keep pilots alive when all electronics and hydraulics failed. Engaging manual reversion, Sarah gritted through her teeth. She reached down and yanked the manual reversion lever. In an instant, the hydraulic lines decoupled, connecting her control stick directly to a series of steel cables and pulleys attached to the flight control surfaces. She was now flying a 40,000-pound metal bathtub using nothing but raw human muscle. She grabbed the stick with both hands, planted her boots firmly on the rudder pedals, and pulled back with every ounce of strength she had in her arms and core. The resistance was unbelievable, like trying to steer a concrete truck through mud with a broken steering wheel. Her muscles screamed, her shoulders tearing under the strain as she fought gravity and the crippled aerodynamics of her jet. "Come on, you ugly bastard. Fly," she screamed. At 400 feet above the valley floor, the nose stubbornly, agonizingly began to rise. The jet leveled out, groaning and shuddering, clipping the top of a rock formation so closely that the belly armor sparked against the stone. Below her, Chief Petty Officer Derek Keller and his SEAL team had seized the brief window of chaos. The devastating 30mm gun run had vaporized the enemy's front line, creating a thick smokescreen of pulverized rock and cordite. "Move, move, move," Keller roared, grabbing the dragging strap of Connor O'Brien's tactical vest. Doc Miller and Jackson Hayes provided covering fire, walking backward as they laid down short, controlled bursts from their rifles. The 6 men scrambled over loose shale and jagged boulders, desperately pushing toward the dry river wash that served as their only exfiltration route. If they could get into the winding canyon of the wash, they would be shielded from the high ground and could hold out until a rescue chopper arrived. "Chief, we got a problem," Hayes bellowed, sliding into a ditch and pointing down the mouth of the wash. A rusted Toyota Hilux Technical, a pickup truck heavily modified with welded armor plating, and a mounted DSK heavy machine gun in the bed, had just rolled into the entrance of the wash, cutting off their escape. A dozen enemy fighters were swarming around it, using the truck as mobile cover. Before Keller could even raise his rifle, the DSHK opened up. The sheer size of the 12.7mm rounds shattered the boulders around the SEALs, pinning them flat against the freezing dirt. "We're trapped!" Miller yelled over the deafening gunfire, desperately throwing a tourniquet over a new shrapnel wound on O'Brien's leg. "We can't punch through that armor with 5.56 rounds. Keller grabbed his radio, his heart pounding in his throat. He looked up at the sky, seeing the A-10 trailing a thick black plume of smoke, flying erratically, barely clearing the mountain peaks. He knew the pilot was fighting for her life. "Bore 11, this is Outlaw 2, Keller transmitted, his voice grim. "We are blocked at the wash by heavy armor. We are black on ammo and combat ineffective. If you are still in the sky, we need a miracle right now. Otherwise, it's been an honor." In the cockpit, Sarah was sweating profusely despite the freezing air blasting through the shattered climate control vents. Her left engine was sputtering, choking on its own shrapnel, and her fuel gauge was officially resting on 0. She was flying on fumes and pure stubbornness. She looked at her armament screen. She was completely out of 30mm ammunition. The gun was empty. However, under her right wing hung a single GBU-12 Paveway 2 laser-guided bomb, but with her targeting pod destroyed by the missile blast, the laser guidance was useless. It was a dumb bomb now. To hit a target as small as a pickup truck, she would have to drop it manually, at an incredibly low altitude, directly over the SEALs' heads. It was a maneuver that violated every safety protocol in the manual. Outlaw 2, Bore 1-1. I have one bomb left. It's unguided, Sarah replied, her voice trembling slightly from the physical exertion of holding the control stick steady. I have to drop it danger close. Really danger close. Keep your heads in the dirt. Do it, Keller replied instantly. Sarah wrestled the unyielding control stick, forcing the crippled A-10 Warthog back toward the valley of the Spin Gar. Without hydraulic assistance, every maneuver required agonizing, full-body exertion. On the peaks, the enemy anti-aircraft gunners spotted the smoking American jet, circling back, and instantly unleashed hell. Thick ropes of green tracer fire sliced past her cracked canopy, but Sarah ignored the deadly light show. Her eyes were locked on the narrow entrance to the dry wash. Pushing the nose down, the jagged earth rushed up. Through the flickering digital sight on her heads-up display, she aligned the crosshairs with the rusted hood of the armored technical pinning down the SEALs. Stand by, she breathed into her mask, her thumb hovering rigidly over the weapon release. She was flying barely 100 feet off the ground, a massive, screaming target. The gunner in the technical finally saw her dropping out of the grey soup. Frantically, he swung the heavy DSK machine gun upward and squeezed the trigger. Heavy 12.7mm rounds slammed into the A-10's titanium bathtub. The impact sounded like a sledgehammer striking an anvil. Sarah gritted her teeth, refusing to flinch or alter her dive. She needed momentum. She needed the perfect angle. Clear, Sarah yelled. She mashed the release button and instantly hauled back on the stick with explosive force. The 500-pound unguided bomb detached from the wing pylon, carrying the jet's massive forward momentum. As Sarah hauled the heavy A-10 skyward, her shoulder muscles tearing under the violent G-forces, the world beneath her turned blindingly white. The bomb impacted directly on the technical. The resulting explosion was absolutely catastrophic. A massive shockwave ripped through the narrow wash, sending a towering plume of black smoke, liquid fire, and shredded metal hundreds of feet into the freezing air. On the ground, Chief Keller and his exhausted team were lifted inches off the dirt by the concussive blast, their ears ringing with a painful whine. When the thick, choking smoke finally began to clear, Keller looked up. The armored technical was gone. The enemy fighters blocking their path were vaporized. Only a smoldering, blackened crater remained. "Move!" Keller screamed, hauling O'Brien to his feet by his plate carrier. "Into the wash, now!" The SEALs sprinted through the debris, boots pounding against loose gravel. They slipped past the burning wreckage and disappeared into the deep, winding cover of the canyon walls. The encirclement was broken. Bore 1-1, this is Outlaw 2. Keller panted heavily into his radio, leaning against the cold stone of the canyon. Target destroyed. We are clear. You are an absolute godsend, Bore. Now get yourself home. Copy that, Outlaw. Sarah's voice came back, strained and fading. See you on the other side. In the cockpit, Sarah was losing her final battle. Her left engine completely seized, shooting a massive 10-foot tongue of orange flame from the exhaust before grinding to a catastrophic halt. She slammed the emergency fire extinguisher, suffocating the engine compartment in chemical foam. Now, flying on a single dying engine, in complete manual reversion, with zero fuel remaining, she needed a miracle. Her navigation systems flickered and died. Bagram was impossible. But roughly 40 miles east, tucked in a small valley, was Forward Operating Base Fenty in Jalalabad. It was a tiny airstrip meant for helicopters, not a heavy fighter jet coming in hot without brakes. Fenty Tower, Bore 1-1, declaring an in-flight emergency. Sarah broadcasted on the guard frequency, fighting to keep the nose level. Severe battle damage, single engine, manual reversion, running on fumes, requesting emergency vector. Bore 1-1, Fenty Tower, we have you on radar. Be advised, runway is extremely short. Trucks are scrambling. As the small airstrip came into view, her right engine sputtered and died. She yanked the landing gear lever, relying on emergency pneumatic air. 2 green lights illuminated. The third, the nose wheel, remained stubbornly red. It was jammed. Coming in for a belly landing, Sarah transmitted. She aligned the unpowered 40,000-pound glider with the concrete. The main rear tires hit the tarmac with a violent screech. Sarah fought the manual stick, desperately holding the nose in the air to bleed speed, but eventually, gravity won. The nose slammed into the runway at 140 miles per hour. A horrific screech of tearing metal echoed across the base as the rotary cannon ground against the tarmac. A massive shower of bright orange sparks engulfed the canopy. The jet violently fishtailed, sliding sideways, tearing up huge chunks of asphalt before agonizingly grinding to a dead halt just 50 feet from the airstrip's end. Sarah sat in the absolute silence, breathing the acrid smell of burning aviation fuel. She slowly released her death grip on the stick. Sirens wailed outside. She popped the canopy, the cold air hitting her sweat-soaked face. She had made it. 3 weeks later, in a quiet ceremony at Bagram, a row of Navy SEALs stood at strict attention. Chief Keller, his arm in a sling, broke rank as Captain Jenkins entered. He didn't salute. The hardened SEAL walked forward and wrapped the pilot in a tight, one-armed embrace. "We never got to thank you for that danger close," Keller whispered. Sarah smiled. "Just doing my job, Chief." Do you love gripping, real-life military stories of heroism and survival? This story of Captain Jenkins and the Navy SEALs proves that even in the darkest valleys, courage can turn the tide. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who respects true grit. And don't forget to subscribe for more intense, untold stories from the battlefield every single week.